Greetings comic lovers and welcome back to Casually Comics, the channel where we chat all things comics, from reviews of comics new and old to history to anecdotes to really wherever our whims take us. Peacemaker. Who is he? At the time of this recording, the Peacemaker has suddenly exploded. Set to be played by John Cena. He's in Suicide Squad 2 and is set to be getting an HBO series. We'll see. Trust nothing until you're actually watching it, consuming it with your own eyes. And in general, the Peacemaker is just being pushed more than he ever has before in the year 2021. Pushed in the Suicide Squad marketing and in the comic. Horizontal marketing, synergy. But for many people, his inclusion induced a who? Or a wow, that's a deep cut. Well, wonder no longer, for we are going to take a look at his origins, his first revamp, and his connection to the Watchmen. Get excited for a man who loves peace so much he'll kill for it. I guess the name Paradox was already taken. But before we get started, I'm Sasha, and if you're enjoying this content, you know what to do. Hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. Join us in this comic book journey. The character of the Peacemaker is an old one and comes from Charlton Comics, who would later have most of their character roster purchased by DC Comics in 1983. During a period where a former editor of Charlton, Dick Giordano, was managing editor at DC. Coincidence? I think not. Charlton would officially become defunct in 1986. Now, there have been a couple of Peacemakers, but for our purposes we need to look at the first, the original, Christopher Smith, who is also the one that's going to be featuring in the revival. Christopher Smith, the Peacemaker, was frankly a bit player even in Charlton's own roster. He's not Blue Beetle or The Question or Captain Atom. Peacemaker was created by Joe Gill and Pat Boyette. He debuted as a backup story in Fightin' 5 number 40 in 1966. The Fightin' 5 were an espionage team. He didn't stay in that book long because it was canceled in issue 41, so one issue after he got put in as a backup. So he had one complete adventure there and then moved on to having his own series in 1967. That lasted 5 issues. Sorry, Christopher. After DC bought him, they gave him a 4-issue mini in 1988, though he had been seen prior briefly, such as in Crisis on Infinite Earths in 1985, and then again in Vigilante 36 in 1986, as a bit player, so he was phased in a bit before he got a mini. Now, the man who loves peace so much he'll kill for it was a bit of a clunky gimmick, so it'll be interesting to see how the 2020s treat him. He is ripe for an overhaul and update at the time of this recording. But before 2021, where the Peacemaker was most known was not as himself, but actually as a character in the Watchmen. He was an inspiration slash template for one of the characters. Alan Moore initially pitched his idea for the Watchmen with licensed DC characters. People hear that and often assume the main crew, Superman, Batman, and the like. In fact, there are many false equivocations between characters, because the characters pitched by Moore were Charlton heroes. The Peacemaker is the comedian. Or rather, the comedian is a very dialed up Peacemaker with some other elements mixed in, but he appears to be modeled off of the later Peacemaker appearances. Much more so than his early ones. But I'll let you decide what you think, because we're gonna look at it all. So let's start off with the Peacemaker's first outing. Introducing the Peacemaker, a great new addition to the Charlton line of action heroes. Awkward. This a man who detests war, violence, and the dreadful waste of human life and senseless conflict between nations. A man who loves peace, so much so that he is willing to fight for it. This is the same man. Name, Christopher Smith. Occupation, envoy to the Geneva Arms Conference. A man dedicated to peace. Peacemaker has Reed Richards hair streaks. This concerns me. So the gist of this story is that Christopher is going to a peace conference, but his mind is on brewing border wars in South America. And he's heard that a man named Bork, who is going to be at this conference, has been selling weapons to both sides. So Christopher wants to know what's up and if he can find some way to defuse this situation diplomatically. I'm not exactly sure what his plan is for that, but he's going. He lands, gets briefed by his secretary, and they leave the airport. At this moment, Emil Bork, the suspected war maker, is waiting for Christopher Smith's limousine. They shoot up his car, and wow, a bowler hat and a cravat and a walking stick. Emil, save some fashion for the rest of us. When his men go down to check, it turns out that Christopher's suitcase is full of poison deadly gas, and it kills them. After a meeting with Bork on a social slash quasi-diplomatic level, Christopher decides he's exhausted all his options. I detest violence, but because of my inadequacy, thousands of innocents may die. I must do what I have sworn never to do. Christopher, didn't you kill 2 guys on the way over here with a deadly gas suitcase? He must be stopped, and I cannot succeed with peaceful methods. I've resisted taking this step, but in this case, violence must be met with violence. Although violence is against everything I stand for, there is no other solution. And so, although Christopher Smith has sworn never to use these implements of violence, he reluctantly assumes the role of the Peacemaker. You see, you can tell that he never wanted to do it because he already had a costume commissioned with his own special logo, which admittedly is clever, the symbol of an upside down dove, a falling dove, so the reverse of your traditional peaceful dove. It's a good emblem, not gonna lie. Also, you can tell how he doesn't want to do it because he has a complete weapons arsenal, and by the fact that when he had the option of potentially putting a non-lethal gas that would just knock people out if they opened his briefcase, he chose a deadly one. Oh wow, he has a jetpack and a laser ray? So he goes to take on Emil Bork, an adventure that concludes in the final issue of Fightin' 5, issue 41. And he ultimately deals with Bork by blowing up his plane, and he uses some nerve gas to paralyze the enemy armies. You know, the ones that Bork sold weapons to both sides. Peacemaker just has all the things. How? Why? Shh. Okay, so Fightin' 5 gets cancelled, but Charlton wanted to try again with the Peacemaker. This is how in 1967 we see him helming his own series, with the Fightin' 5 as a backup. This is a little bit of a clever twist to get around the fact that the Fightin' 5 was cancelled. There's even a letter in the first issue talking about how clever they feel about this, in a piece by editor Dick Giordano. Recently, we began using the Peacemaker as a companion story in the now defunct Fightin' 5. Male reaction to the Peacemaker and to Pat Boyette, its artist, was good. So when the decision was made to cease publication of the Fightin' 5, we thought we'd just make a little switch. And here it is, the Peacemaker in his own book with a revamped version of the Fightin' 5 as a companion story. I like how that's phrased, like when we decided to cease publication, not when they made us cancel it. The Peacemaker, a man who loves peace so much that he is willing to fight for it. John Cena! The first adventure has to do with people fishing outside their lane and the diverting of migratory fish. Who's diverting those fish? Potential sabotage. This is a job for Christopher Smith. Somehow, when the Commodore, the villain of this story, destroys the nets, Christopher leaves his role of diplomat, goes, gets changed, and comes back as Peacemaker and dives in. Is his identity supposed to be a secret? Because if so, you're doing it a bit wrong, Chris. He disables the bombs, finds a nuclear submarine, talks to the Commodore, whose motivation boils down to, I want to be a pirate and control things under the sea, and so he decides that the best way to deal with this is by blowing it up. So he blows up the sub. The end. And there are some lines about how potentially most people got off it, but we all know that they did. Next story, you get multiple Peacemaker stories per book. 2 Peacemakers and then a Fightin' 5. This is Christopher Smith, career diplomat, intellectual, and a man who despises violence in any form. Does he though? Yet, despite his peace-loving creed, this man can become a harsh, deadly adversary when danger threatens mankind. He is a master of every weapon known to man, but these powerful and secret arms are for the exclusive use of the Peacemaker. Wait, he has a whole custom arsenal? Not just regular weapons, but custom made? I mean, I guess that explains the laser ray. Abhors violence of any kind. I like this story because it opens with Christopher being slapped by a fellow ambassador, duel style. And then that ambassador threatens to kill him in front of everyone. The thing that surprised me the most about the story is that by the end of it, Christopher hadn't killed him. Issue 4 would not only retell his first adventure from Fightin' 5 issue 40, but also would give him a bit of a backstory that he tells a woman applying for the position as his secretary. As he states, the person must know as much about him as possible to be able to work for him. We learn that his father was an army officer turned statesman, and his mother worked in a laboratory. He cites them as inspirations to learn science and hone his skills, so he was able to rise in the ranks and build an impressive career. He actually reveals his identity as the Peacemaker to Nora, the applicant in question, after vetting her, as he feels anybody working for him needs to be fully informed, which is a nice change of pace. He claims that he just wishes to incapacitate people, but life won't let him. So what led him to become the Peacemaker? What is the link between charmed life backstory and killing for peace? Why? Because man is civilized, governed by law. But unfortunately, there are madmen who will not obey these laws and will not submit to the sanity of diplomacy. The Peacemaker is an action buffer between these men and global war. Okay, Christopher. Okay, look, these plots are thin, rough, and they have many holes. The action is also quick and not overly engaging or dynamic. Christopher has a thin personality and contradictory motivations. It was okay, but not amazing. And none of it landed, as evidenced by the fact that it only lasted 5 issues. The Fightin' 5 backup clearly did it no favors. So the Peacemaker was shelved for quite a number of years, even years after the purchase of the Charlton characters by DC. Until 1988, where a 4-issue miniseries was released, written by Paul Cooperberg with art by Todd Smith. Peacemaker, just him shooting and blowing things up. It's okay. I think it's meant to convey a what? But it said peace, and he's blowing stuff up. But for me, it just looks chaotic. They kept his costume the same. Actually, so have the 2020s. Guess it was a strong look. Now at the start, things seem to be heading in the same direction. Government intrigue, Christopher stopping it. But then you see that Chris is talking to a hallucination, that he was part of something called Project Peacemaker, a program that has collapsed, but he kept the name. That he has people in his household who are plants monitoring him, and that his psychological state is varying, that he's not always entirely lucid. This series decided to spend a decent amount of time trying to explain how Christopher came to this contradictory philosophy of his, why he must kill kill to keep the peace. This by giving him a new backstory. I'm Peacemaker and I'll kill to keep the peace. We see that Christopher suffers from vivid auditory and visual hallucinations of his father and Nazis in concentration camps, that he talks aloud to them at times, and that he's also unaware sometimes that other people are even around. Comfortable, monsieur? Bon. Tell me what troubles you, Christopher. I'm not sure. Yesterday when I killed those terrorists, I thought I'd achieve victory, but it's feeling so hollow now. Now this issue starts to take a deep dive into Christopher, but most of that is accented by what is done at the end, wherein there is an attachment written prose style that goes deep into Christopher. It's a psych report, a full-on psych report at the end of this issue. So you get to see the case history of Christopher Smith. So I'll combine the two so you can learn all that we learned about Christopher in this first issue. We learned that Christopher Smith was born Christopher Schmidt. He was the son of a high-ranking Nazi officer, a war criminal who ran concentration camps, who fled with his family after the war. But he was found out, and so the news reached Christopher, who was 5 at the time, who had had no idea about his father's past. He then bore witness to his father's suicide. The fact that he was present is something that is known to the reader, but not to anybody else, so it's not there in the psych report, which only notes that the suicide unsettled him. But we see that he was actually there to witness it, and also are privy to some of the ways that his father used to speak to him, which was pretty abusive. Christopher becomes a problem child and a bully, lashing out. He has to go to intense psychotherapy as a child, but the school blames his mother, which creates a resentment between mother and child. Christopher then joins the army at 18 and seems to be doing better under the structure and regimen. That is until he's shipped out to Vietnam. There, when securing a village, he suddenly flips, massacring all of the inhabitants. This is a completely unprovoked attack. He is charged with war crimes and sent to prison. There he is later contacted with the offer of a full pardon to be part of Project Peacemaker, or the Peacemaker Force. It was meant to be a group to combat terrorism. The project, it turns out, was seeking people who were unbalanced and prone to violence for reconditioning, so the agents could be controlled but would be just as violent. The project fell apart and kind of slipped through the cracks, so Christopher was actually just able to walk out. He was one of 2 who were successfully reconditioned, but because of that he had the prime directive in his core of stopping terrorism and instilling peace at all costs, and so created the persona of the Peacemaker. But he was still really unstable, unable to reconcile his desire to kill with his desire for peace. So for a time he thought that the souls of the people he killed were taking up residence inside his helmet, and that made him even more unstable. As you see in Vigilante 42 and 43, where he also just thought someone was a terrorist when they weren't. So yes, Peacemaker actually guested a few times in Vigilante, and yes, there is a Vigilante just called Vigilante. That book was actually pretty intense. The Pentagon decided to use him because he's effective and assign him missions, and they were even able to work around the souls within the helmet's delusion. But it was just replaced with others. This tension is attempted to be worked through in the psych reports, which attributes it to a love and hatred of his father, an inability to reconcile the man his father was, the things he did, and how he treated Christopher. This all is bound up with his suicide and evasion of justice. So it is said that the massacre was Christopher following in his father's footsteps so he could be punished, taking on the punishment his father could not. However, Christopher's grasp on reality is weak, to the point where if there is no assigned mission, he'll invent a threat and pursue that. The psych report does not recommend him for field duty. It was obviously ignored. Throughout the 4 issues, Christopher works through some of his own issues a tiny bit, as the villain he fights, a very Fu Manchu stereotype, reminds him of his father, and even talks to him in the same manner as his hallucination dad. So in defeating him, he's able to exorcise his father, for a time it seems. Dr. Zinzin's plan was to destroy the Soviet infrastructure and take over the ruins to create his own power base to export his terrorist operations, which is why they sent one man hallucinating his dead dad. Sounds legit. Also, the last issue of that run was called Peace of War. Also, here's a panel of Christopher's tight buns from issue 1, just cuz. You're welcome. So this mini comes together better than prior Peacemaker outings. The action builds more effectively, and the intrigue feels like it has more stakes, but it still leaves you with questions, and it's a bit hard to buy Christopher's role in this universe. The updates to his character and backstory work well and render him much more interesting, but it actually makes him a lot more interesting than the things happening around him. I found myself wanting to just read a book full of his psych reports and the backstory about him rather than the adventure that was going on in the issues themselves. There was interesting work to be done here. Also, big note to his romance with his handler, who he doesn't seem to be aware is his handler. It works better than the past Charlton outings, but it doesn't fully coalesce. But there is a lot of potential here, and kudos to building on the very slim foundations they had at the start, which was essentially guy who will fight for peace, diplomat by day, serial killer, also oftentimes by day. Some of these elements would be used for the comedian. You can definitely see it in the Vietnam segments of the comedian's character. This 1987 update is very intense though, and bordering on exploitative at times. There was also a version who went by the name Christopher Smith and Peacemaker in the Blue Beetle series featuring Jaime Reyes, but this one changed the look. Boo! Also, he has a clearly focused mission involving the Scarab. It's very tied to the canon of Jaime's book pre-Flashpoint and New 52. The more recent appearance of the Peacemaker in comics have seen him brought into the Suicide Squad, and so far at the time of this recording he seems more stable-ish. Perhaps we will see a marriage of the more competent classic Christopher with the more developed and interesting something working in all they put into his first revival. Or perhaps something new altogether. This was an overview for some of you who are wondering just who is the Peacemaker? Why is he? John Cena! What do you think of the Peacemaker? Do you think he has potential? Which version do you like, if any? Or just no, not for you, not your cup of tea. Next, please. Share all your thoughts down below. While you're down there, please do all the YouTube things. Like, share, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell notification so that you never miss a vid. Thanks so much for taking some time of your day spent discussing comics with me. I always appreciate it, and I will see you again soon. Bye-bye!